All righty, folks. I believe that we are now live here. Hope everybody is doing well. I can see some folks already commenting in the chat function there. So folks, when you're able to see my screen here, please let me know in the chat function. It should say the Gardening Talk Show live with our wonderful guest, Kristen. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing put it into presenter mode. But if you could do it again, just let me know in the chat function once you're able to see my screen. Then we'll go ahead and dive straight into our housekeeping items from there. So perfect. Looks like Kelly has the screen there. Hey, Pat over in Abbotsford. Michelle over in Penticton. Wonderful. Sandra, thanks for reaching out. Glad that we were able to get the invite over to you and get you into the session. Perfect. Looks like we are all set and off to the races here. Hey, Bonnie, great to see you. Alrighty, folks. So we're going to get straight into our conversation because these hours really tend to fly by. And so our housekeeping items, just as we dive into that, first things first is that any questions over the course of the session, go ahead and fire those into the chat function here. And on top of that, with these gardening talk shows and even the happy hours, it's been fun just seeing so much of the dialogue and the conversation back and forth. So by all means, feel free to jump in there, shed your experiences on any of the questions that are coming up, and just as much knowledge with one another in there. So just to make sure that everybody knows where the chat function is, how to be utilizing it, go ahead and share in there which vegetable are you most excited to be growing as a succession crop this year. So which vegetable or flower, I suppose, are you most excited to be growing this season? Next piece is that I encourage you to grab yourself a drink and a snack, whether that's a beer or a wine, cocktail, mocktail, water, tea, anything in between. Get yourself a little snack. Don't want this feeling like a work situation or work event, anything along those lines, but rather just a really fun hour here. And then the last piece is that in terms of how this session is going to run, Chris and I, we're going to have our conversation. I'm going to ask her my most burning questions on the succession planting front for kind of the first 30 to 40 minutes. And then the last 20 minutes is all Q&A questions from each and every one of you. We're going to be able to ask all of those to Kristen this evening and get her thoughts, her insight on them. So super fortunate on that front. And I can see some of the succession crops coming through: peas, Brussels sprouts. Allison, both Allison Chapman and Shepherd, I am with both of you on the broccoli front. I really, really am looking forward to getting that one going this season. And then we've got some more peas, some more broccoli. Amazing. So chat function is working there. For those of you that I haven't met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, and we're a gardening business based out of Squamish, but we approach things a little bit differently in that we're entirely focused on connecting individuals to the mental health benefits of gardening. So I know we got some experienced gardeners on the line here and can attest to just how calming and soothing and restorative the garden is. But I also know that it can be a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming when you're on the newer side to gardening. So a huge part of our responsibility here at Mind and Soil is doing tons and tons of education, taking as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible, which is why we love to do sessions like this, our happy hours. And then every single week, we release 2 videos on our YouTube channel just to be doing as much education as possible. So folks, the one thing that I would encourage you to do at this particular moment is that there should be a little red button just below the screen that says subscribe. And I encourage you to subscribe to the channel here because you're then going to be notified when we release those new videos, like the one we're doing on aphids this weekend. But on top of that, you can ask questions on any one of the videos, and you're going to get a response from me within 24 hours. So really, really want to be here to support you with your gardening this season and into the future. Now, that is enough about me. We are super, super fortunate to be joined by Kristen Crouch this evening. So Kristen is a master gardener. She's based over in Delta and just absolutely so talented and just like a wizard in the garden here. I've had the pleasure of interacting with a lot of folks over the last 2 years on the gardening front, and the kind of like wealth of knowledge that Kristen has from the vegetable side to the flower side to herbs to landscaping is just such an incredible depth of knowledge that we're going to get to tap into this evening here. So Kristen, I'd love actually just to pass it over to you to share with the group here a little bit in terms of what your kind of journey and kind of like your gardening journey has been up to now.
Well, I've been gardening for so long. I mean, I hate to say how long, or I'd probably be dating myself, right? But probably, over 40 years or at least 40 years. And that sort of starts, and I think like for most people, once you buy your first home, and of course, a lot of people aren't doing that now, but, when you usually have pride and you take pride in what your home and your property looks like. So you start to think about making it more beautiful, right? So I've been doing that for years. And then, of course, I, wanted to learn more and became a master gardener. And then that wasn't enough. So then I went back to university at 35 and got my diploma in horticulture. So, and there we go. I'd like to go back again, actually.
I didn't even realize that you'd also done the horticultural degree on top of the Master Gardeners. I'm imagining it's a certificate that you would have done on that front.
Yes. Yeah. Through University of Guelph. Yeah. It was great. It was great. But now I want to do landscape design, right? So
that might be next on the list, eh?
It could be. It could be. I enjoyed that.
Love it. Cool. Well, to begin kind of diving in here, I want folks to, get to know you a little bit. And so I always like to start things off with a couple of just kind of like rapid fire questions here. And The first one is, what was the first crop or first plant that you ever grew?
First one that I ever grew was Sweet William, which is a dianthus flower. And I had such success with that in growing that from just probably bought plants. I mean, it was only like 20. So, I'm sure, but I had a whole border of them, and that had me hooked because they bloomed for weeks on, you think you've won the lottery when you get it right.
Totally.
So that was my first success. And it's funny, I went years without growing them, and now I've got them back in the garden again because they're such a great flower.
Amazing. And there, your first success. So now to go to the other end of the spectrum, what's been the biggest, I guess, flop or failure for you this season in the garden?
This season in the garden? Oh my goodness. How many do you want to count between the slugs and all the things? You can put up the prettiest pictures online, but there's always something. And I must admit, what's the biggest flop? Probably thinking that I could leave my tomatoes out during all this rain. Because I think I've got the first signs of a Septoria leaf spot on one of my plants. So it's in the sick bay right now.
Gotcha.
So I have an animal sick, like an animal hospital, but a plant hospital.
I have a little ICU, an intensive care unit for the plants that I need to kind of like put into an area and not have them infect everybody else, and see if I can baby them back to life there. And what I love about that so much, right, is that like you've got so much gardening experience. You've seen a lot of seasons, you've grown a lot of plants, and even still there's flops, there's failures. It happens each and every season, kind of regardless of the amount of experience that we might have coming into that season.
Well, and you can't control Mother Nature. I think that's the biggest thing is being able to just adapt to Mother Nature's kind of ebbs and flows kind of things. Because I mean, we've seen the extreme weather of last year, and now we're going into another wet, cool year, but it may not be that hot this summer. So,
Totally. Yeah, it was really interesting because as we were leading into the season, you're kind of back in March or so, and everybody had in the back of their mind the heat dome kind of on their head and this really hot May or June that's been on the horizon. And I remember in a couple of our sessions being like, that was last year, but the previous year was really cold. So we don't quite know yet what we've got in store for 2022. And sure enough, it's been like the polar opposite of what the 2021 beginning of the season was. And so it just kind of goes to show that, we kind of have to be prepared for like whatever Mother Nature is going to throw our way, and we can have our plan, but need to be kind of malleable on it as well.
And people always wonder why I grow a lot of plants, and there's a reason for that, because when you have something that doesn't do well, you've got backups, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's always good. I've got a couple backups. I've moved peppers into the greenhouse just in case it got too cold out again, right?
Totally. So if you could grow only one crop for the rest of your life, you have to say goodbye to everything else, but you're only growing one crop, what would be the one crop?
Oh, probably tomatoes. I'm such a tomato addict. I am. And I love heirloom tomatoes. And I don't think in my lifetime I can grow all the different kinds of tomatoes there are out there because there's so many different kinds.
Okay, so I'm gonna make it even harder now. If you could only grow one variety of a tomato for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really hard question. It's like asking me to choose one of my favorite children. I'm just, I can't do that. I mean, I love cherry tomatoes, but having a really nice, good, juicy tomato for your sandwich is the best. And I think one of my favorites is Guam.
Okay, got you. Yeah,
Oh, great tomato.
amazing.
Yeah.
And then if you could use only one tool for the rest of your life here, what would that be?
The rest of my life? Oh, my garden cart.
Yeah.
You forget that we garden on 21,000 square feet.
Wow.
And I can't imagine not having a garden cart, because when you're weeding, I don't want to walk that far. I get a lot of steps in here, right? I can do 10,000 steps just in the garden.
A good amount of space to be covering.
Yeah. And we've had our garden carts for like 20 years.
Okay. Yeah. How big is it?
Well, it holds like 2 garden waste cans.
Okay.
So they're big, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got 2 of them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, we're going to start diving into the kind of succession planting side of things here. I just had an individual knocking on the side of my window. So if I'm distracted for a minute or two here, that would be why here. I'm not sure what they're looking for or needing, but I think it was actually a pizza delivery individual. So who knows? Hopefully there's a pizza waiting for me at the end of our session here. But Kristen, what we're kind of diving into today is all things succession planting. And it's a really amazing side of gardening because we're able to always have something coming out of the garden, something going into the garden. And so I suppose maybe just from kind of a high level to get started on that front, what does succession planting mean to you? And how do you go about incorporating that into your plan for the season?
Well, to begin with, in the beginning of the year, I always sketch out my garden. So whether it be a vegetable garden or even my flower, if I'm growing flowers, I always have a plan of what's going to go in what space and usually what's going to follow it in the fall, and it depends, like succession gardening. Just that's my best way to do it. It's just planning ahead, right?
Yeah.
And knowing and I only grow what I like to eat.
Okay.
So I'm not going to be growing kale because I can't stand it. It's okay, but I would rather have lots of lettuce.
You say you hate it. I like kale. I won't take offense. Don't you worry.
But if I can't get enough of salad greens, so I grow what we want to eat on the dinner table.
For sure. And so when you're sketching out your garden there, and you've got a very sizable and significantly significant garden, do you have specific zones that are flower versus veg? How do you go about laying out a garden of that size?
In my vegetable garden, we have raised beds because we have such poor drainage here in Ladner, our water table is really high. So we garden in raised beds, and that allows me to grow a mix of, I always interplant my vegetables with flowers. You won't see a bed that doesn't have perhaps marigolds around the edges or sweet alyssum to attract pollinators. So I always interplant those kind of things. And I will plant basil in the flower garden, because basil is not only a good cut flower, but it tastes pretty darn good too. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more interdispersed.
It's more of more of an interplanting. Yeah. Most of the season long. And then of course, as things come out, you always want to think ahead. So my rule is never have any bare soil.
Yeah.
Because you've got bare soil, you're a bad planter when it comes to the garden. So this time of the year, the garlic's going to come out in a few weeks. So what are you planting there?
Perfect. Yeah. So this is a great piece to dive, a little bit further into. So using the garlic piece as an example, what are you thinking from a succession planting perspective there? What's going to be going in place when that garlic comes out in kind of mid-July?
So I will be planting carrots. I will be planting, you could plant a lot of the beans that are short. Now you want to look, of course, check out your growing season, see how long it is, because obviously if your frost is early October, you want to make sure that what you're planting in July is you're going to, you want to look at the days to harvest on the package and make sure you've got enough time to have a harvest, because generally you want everything to harvest before that first frost or even weeks before that. So I usually plant things like carrots, beans. That will go in July, but other crops will go in August. So, because as we start to cool down,
Yeah.
the reverse, you should get 3 harvests a year. So you'll get your spring crops where you'll harvest, then you'll have a harvest of your summer crops. And then as your summer crops fade, you should be able to plant for fall, and you'll start off with your cool season crops, like your salad crops again.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask next is like, so you got your carrots and your beans that you're getting started in July here. Those are going to be ready in the fall, but it sounds like you're even starting another set of seeds in August.
Yes.
Some of those be that you'd be starting at that point?
Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to have, because I like to overwinter crops, because I live in zone 8, I have the ability to overwinter crops as long as it doesn't go down to -13 again, because that wasn't very good for things. And
Yeah.
so I will grow lettuce and spinach, and I will pick varieties that are suited for overwintering. So there's things like your winter density lettuce, and then there's a different lettuce. So there's quite a few different lettuces now out that are winter tolerant, right?
Yeah,
And
just
I'll
like
try and get a hardy spinach as well.
they're just like they're just a little bit more hardy.
Yes, that's right. And so then I'll also use, and the weather gets really cold again, then I will use some floating row covers to help protect them. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And that was going to be a kind of a follow-up question for me there is, succession planting, we generally think of going through the season and ending with that fall harvest, but it kind of sounds like, and I think that there's actually like a succession crop that commences in that like end of summer that's actually an overwinter, so that you've got something early in the springtime. And so I'm curious to hear some of your like best practices for overwintering in order to get that early spring crop.
So for overwintering, if you think that your crops are going to go, because don't forget because of our late season, I think everything's behind by 2 or 3 weeks. The garlic is going to come out a little bit later than normally. I would pull it out probably the first week of July, and maybe it's not going to be second or third week before it's ready. So I'm thinking that I'll probably start some of my crops from seed instead of direct sowing the lettuce or spinach, which is easy to do. I may just start them in the greenhouse, or, for the home gardener, they could just start them inside, and then they're all ready to go. And actually they're big enough that, when it does get wet, maybe they're a little bit better able to battle against the slugs and snails and that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start a bunch of stuff in the greenhouse, and I would do that in July. Or you don't even have to start it inside. You could probably start it outside if you've got room somewhere in the shade where you could start that. It's just the greenhouse would be way too hot to start it inside. When I think about it, it's a cool season crop, right?
For sure. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And that's like something that, I don't know, I guess maybe it's where I went first when it came to succession planting, was not actually direct sowing in the garden in every 2 to 3 week increments, but rather starting a new crop in seed cells. And then once space became available in the garden, transplanting those in. And I've like really enjoyed that approach, because it ensures that for me, like the moment that something comes out of the garden and we've got bare soil, I'm not putting a seed back in there. I'm putting a full on plant that's anywhere from kind of like 14 to 28 days since the point that I started it as a seed. And then you also get like that beautiful overlap in the season where we've now like artificially extended the season by 14 to 28 days, which in a season like the one that we're having right now could end up making all the difference.
Definitely. I mean, because you're so far ahead when you start them from seed, right? And it's so easy if you've got a little plant shelf out in the backyard to start them in the shaded area or something like that, especially if it's really hot. And if you're planting carrots in July, it's not easy to direct sow carrot seeds and because they're so tiny, they're planted right under the soil. So I think one of my other tricks to do is actually wetting the soil really, really well, planting that carrot seed, and then I cover all my carrot seed with burlap for a week.
Yeah.
Because it keeps the soil cool, and a week later, most of your carrot seeds should already be up. So, and you can
for sure. Yeah. Carrots are definitely one of those interesting ones where, they take certainly a couple more days than, say, your arugula or your radishes or even your beets that are also common succession crops. I find that carrots are more in like that 7 to 14 day range, which in the summertime just means like we need to make sure that that soil is staying moist for 7 to 14 days. So that's a really cool idea on kind of putting the burlap over top of them in order to help keep a little bit more moisture in there and the sun off of the soil.
Yeah, it's a good way to recycle the bags you said.
Totally.
Exactly.
You've got no idea, like when when you were using our seedling mix earlier this year and you're telling me how much you enjoyed it, I was like, Kristen's saying this right now, like she knows her stuff and she's super pumped about it. Like that was an absolute highlight on the year here for me. So it was fun then coming out your way and getting to drop off a little bit more for you.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, I guess just jumping back to one of the pieces that you mentioned, we talked, I guess, earlier on where you don't like to have any bare soil. You like the garden always to be working. But then we also run into a situation like this where like Mother Nature is saying like adios to your plan. Things are going a little bit different. So how have you been adjusting your succession plan this season based on how the weather has been?
Well, that's a good question. Well, and of course, here we are sitting with a heat wave coming this weekend. And I was just ready to plant my peppers because my peppers weren't in the ground yet. And yet the lettuce is still in there. And I started to take out a few lettuce and I realized it's like, okay, I've got peppers in between the lettuce, but maybe I'll leave that other lettuce in there for a while. So it's going to shade the plants over the weekend.
Cool.
So basically I've left things like I was growing chervil and arugula and I've got lots of calendula in there. So a lot of other leafy plants that will actually shade the peppers and the basil that I put in there.
Right.
So that it doesn't get scorched because your new plants are so tender at this time when they first go out. They haven't really hardened off really that well. And I mean, they've been on my plant shelf for weeks, of course, but waiting to go into the garden, but still they're pretty tender when you're getting full sun. So
yeah. And I agree with you big time that like when it comes to getting that succession crop into the garden, transplanting them in as small little seedlings, they're stronger, they're hardier, they're less appetizing to a slug or to any of the little critters that might look at them for a meal. And so like I haven't lost any plants when I've been succession planting or planting them in as little seedlings and transplant, which is just kind of like another, like, I guess, cool avenue to that concept of like expanding the garden through seed cells and transplanting them in.
Yeah. It's just so much easier, right? If you've got the space to do that, then I would highly recommend it, or if you think that there's nothing wrong with buying plants either. I mean, if you don't know grow from seed and, you're not comfortable with that and you're a new gardener, go get those plants because you can almost buy them at any time, when the weather cooperates, then get the plants, right?
And even further to that, what I've found in the past is that like as you get into July and into August, a lot of those plants go on sale. And so say for like seed potatoes, doing those as a succession crop, it's really easy to pop over to a nursery, a garden center and find, because they were trying to sell all their seed potatoes for May or for June. And so now they're all like 50% off. And it's like a great time to be loading up on either seedlings that are annuals or perennials, as well as some of those like like potato seeds, etc.
I know. And I'm one of those crazy people that plants potatoes in the fall.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, because my beds are 20 inches deep.
Yeah.
So I just plant them a foot down and we don't freeze that deep here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be harvesting potatoes before the end of this month because these are early. They're already in flower. And so it won't be long before I'll be harvesting. So it'll be a few weeks. So it gets me a few weeks ahead of time, I guess, because unfortunately they're growing up through the snapdragons in one of my beds right now. So I'll just stick a hand under the soil to get them.
So you'll plant your potatoes in the fall time, but do them really, really deep so they don't get killed off from the cold weather. And then you'll just allow those to begin to grow where they are leading into the season, hey?
Yes. And of course, there's always those few potatoes that you miss when you harvest. I mean, I think everybody has that. And I just leave them. And they've been in there since last year. So that's where I clued in. If they were in here last year as tiny potatoes and survived, then why am I not doing that, right? And trying to get it, because you could actually get 2 harvests a year. You could plant them twice if you wanted to, right? You could
Totally.
harvest and plant again. I mean, you wouldn't plant something like a russet potato that's a real long season, but you grab a short season potato like Yukon Gold and maybe plant that one as a
Yeah,
harvest.
and that's exactly like last year I did Yukon Gold at the kind of like the first half of the season. So I planted those basically like April 1st. And then I was harvesting like mid to late July. And then I followed that with a succession crop of French fingerling potatoes. And, those were able to stay into the ground into like October. I think it was like October 30th, I want to say, was when I ended up harvesting those out. And it wasn't like a massive crop, but it was a succession crop of potatoes. And I had fresh potatoes leading into the fall time there, which was just like super cool.
That's the thing with root crops. I mean, they're the best because you don't have to harvest them all at once. It's not like you have to dig them all up. You can just harvest them when you need them. And carrots
Totally.
will last right over winter. If you grow the right carrots, you'll last right over winter into March.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think I can't remember when it was in the fall, but I had missed a couple of carrots and beets. So maybe it was like early December. And so I just pulled those out of the garden and was like able to have a nice fresh meal of garden goodies in the middle of winter time. And I don't know, like I think that what I continue coming back to with succession planting is that like, you know, in some ways it's a little bit challenging to do because we're in the peak of summer and we just want to be thinking about summer, but it's like it's such a like nice thing to do for future Jordan when I then am in like October, November, and I'm like getting goodies out of the garden. So like I'm so appreciative at that point in time for the little bit of like planning and seed starting that I'm doing in June and July. And it sounds like for yourself all the way into August as well there.
And I think, if I was really smart and really organized, I would probably mark it on the calendar and send myself an alert on my phone or something. Plant carrots today, right? Just as a reminder, because like you said, you get it. So the sun comes out, you want to go to the beach. You don't want to be in the garden, maybe.
Exactly. And I know that I like, even right now have like a little bit of seed starting fatigue. And that's, I think somewhat unique to me because I start probably like 5 times more seeds than I plant into the garden because I'm doing all of these experiments, filming content, etc. And so I've been like filming content on seed starting since December. So now that we're in June, I'm like, I don't want to start any more seeds, but I know like that little reminder voice in the back of my head is like, just start a couple more seeds and future you will be thankful for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, right? But I know I'm starting seeds this week again.
Yeah. What are some of the ones that you're starting up this week here?
Just my neighbor's been giving me seeds, So more different types of spinach and lettuce and things like that. So I might try and start a few just so I have extra seeds because I've actually got some seeds that are some lettuce and crops that are popping up in the garden in different places from seed that has dropped because I'm quite a big seed saver. So normally I would let my lettuce go to seed. And then, so obviously if I let it flower and go to seed, often it will drop seeds in the garden. And that's always wanted. I will never pull out a head of lettuce out of the garden.
So yeah, for seed saving, will you leave all of the lettuce in, or do you leave just like one lettuce in and let that be the one that you get all your seeds from?
Well, I guess, it's hard. You need to have the space because normally I would leave probably 5 of the same kind of lettuce because you want to select seeds from a diverse, like a larger gene pool.
Yeah.
And so there's usually a recommended number of plants. Like I don't like to try and take seeds from just one type of, I should be growing like 10 of the same kind of tomato as well. But that's not always, I mean, who has the space for 10 of the same kind, or who wants to grow 10 of the same kind anyway, right? So
yeah. And yeah, like it's super interesting because I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum where I do zero seed saving. And the reason for that is because I want my space like something that is producing bounty harvest yield for me, just because that's what I get the most enjoyment out of. And so it isn't at all like one approach is right, one approach is wrong, but like I'm limited on space. I love just experimenting and playing around with seeing what helps a plant grow best. And so I try to absolutely like maximize the number of days and the amount of space that I can be doing that with.
yeah.
Mhm.
I love seed saving. I'm addicted.
Yeah, it's
I
so
have way too many seeds.
I mean, this is what I love so much about gardening is that I could not be fussed to start or to save seeds at all. But for yourself, it's something that like totally lights you up. And for some folks, it's starting seeds indoors. And for other folks, it's just direct sowing everything. And such like a beautiful part of the gardening journey is finding out like what are the things that light you up the most. And like even today, I was just filming a video before we started here on thinning your seedlings, and I'll thin things out quite a bit. Like I'll only do one kale plant per square foot. But that doesn't mean that that's like the right approach or a wrong approach to it. That's just like what I've found that I enjoy the most. And it's so fun just having conversations with folks to find out what their personal kind of preferences are for how they go about managing and running their gardens.
And I think that I kind of fudge the distances between planting a lot.
Yeah.
Not with certain plants, like with tomatoes, I try not to because they're so prone to disease, right? And powdery mildew. But with flowers, you can get a lot more in less space.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And even in containers, you
Yeah.
can grow a lot in a container when it comes to like salad greens, stuff like that. Not with tomatoes, but with all your salad crops, yeah, it's amazing how much you can put into a container.
Totally, yeah. And I think that like a lot of that knowledge is just accrued through the years of playing around with, all right, I'm going to give things all the space in the world this year, and then be like, I've got way too much bare kind of like soil still. So I'm going to cram things in a little bit. Oh, that's like maybe a little bit too tight. And so it's the compounding of all those learnings year over
Mhm.
year that like just ends up being such like a cool repository to develop.
Well, gardening is a trial and error. It really is because I mean, don't think that I know. I mean, you learn all the time. I learn something new every time, every year, right? Oh, look, I'll watch somebody else's method of gardening. It's like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to say that I don't know everything. That's for sure.
For sure, for sure.
Uh,
So we're going to pop it over to the chat function in just a couple of minutes here. I've got kind of like one or
okay.
two more questions for you, Kristen.
Okay.
But folks, if you do have questions that you would like the incredible Kristen to be answering, go ahead and start sharing those into the chat function. And we're going to go ahead and start asking some of those over to Kristen here. But Kristen, one question that I have for my complete selfish and personal interest is, from a succession planting perspective, and we're thinking about like not having any bare soil. I'm curious if you've done any or if you have any thoughts on, kind of like planting certain crops, say like a radish that we know is going to get harvested fairly early on, alongside some really big crops that are going to start really small, but then are going to need a lot of soil to grow into. Is that something that you've done at all in terms of kind of like, it's almost like succession planting, but pairing from like a space perspective?
Well, yeah, lots of times. I mean, I've planted radishes in between carrot seeds because the radishes obviously will grow in, like it only take like a month to be full size. And then of course that makes sure that you space those carrots properly as well. And this year I'm growing all my vegetables in containers this year because I grow wedding flowers. So this is the year for wedding flowers. So I'm growing cucumbers, which I direct sowed. I kick myself now because I should have started them inside because they're like an inch high, but I've been able to plant radishes as an early crop because of course there's all this bare soil in the container because they're just sitting there,
Yeah,
and also take advantage of it. I could probably plant lettuce again
for sure.
or something else, that'll be a quick crop, right? Yeah.
Oh,
So there's so many things. There's lots of radish and lettuce and and Mizuna, another one. Love your mesclun greens, really quick crops, right?
yeah.
So
It's
I mean, why not? They also provide you a bit of shade, even if the plant does get larger. There's a little bit of shade provided by those heat lovers that will keep your lettuce maybe it'll slow
yeah,
down the bolting
right.
process.
Yeah, it won't bolt quite as quickly, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool, and that's I suppose the area that I'm most curious and fascinated about from like a succession planting perspective at the moment, right? Is that like, when I put my squash and my zucchinis in recently, and they're still like fairly small, but I know that they're going to end up massive. But because of that, I've got these kind of like 1 to 2 foot bare patches of soil. They're going to kind of like remain that way until probably like early to mid-July, and then we'll start getting a little bit crowded. And so I've just started, kind of thinking about like, dang, what are some of those crops that, I could be fitting in there and basically harvesting out as the larger plants reach maturity.
Yeah. And shortest growing crops. There's some beans that are really short, but I don't know. Like, it's just, you have to really do some research on the shortest crops you can get, like, because most of them fall into the salad green category, right?
Yeah.
The lettuce,
Well,
the radishes, Mizuna is really quick too. And I don't know if pak choi be one. They all like cold weather though. So as we go into heat, your plants are probably going to grow really fast now, right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And definitely an element of research, but probably even more than that, like just throw something in there and see how it does, and like extract the learnings from that and then apply those into the subsequent seasons.
Yeah, but there's not. But
Go ahead.
Jordan, why not grow? If you grew up your cucumbers up onto a trellis vertically,
Yeah.
there's nothing to stop you from growing a row of lettuce underneath them, because
Well,
as they grow, that'll provide the shade for the lettuce as well.
but the reason why I don't do that, because I take the same approach as you, where I only grow the things that I love, and I don't love
Okay.
lettuce.
And you don't like salad. Okay.
I grow a lot of kale though, because I can throw it in the ground and then it just like it provides me leaves for like 12 months or so. But conceptually, this is exactly what I'm thinking about. What you allude to there is that like I've got exactly things that are running up trellises. My tomatoes, they're pruned really, really nicely. And so increasingly, I'm just seeing more and more space that could be productive for me.
Yeah, you could. There's so much that I know you hate. There's nothing worse than bare soil. I know tomatoes can take up a lot of room.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
last question before we head over to the chat function here is just, what would be maybe 2 or 3 of the tips that you would have for somebody that is going to be starting their first succession crop this season? What are a couple of tips for them?
Okay, tips for this season. Well, especially as we go into the heat of summer, you just want to sort of be planning your fall garden. So think about that and look for look at how long your growing season is. Ours here on the coast is about 150 days. But, once you get those seeds in the ground, how long do you have left until your first frost? So those days to harvest that are on the seed package sort of have to fit into that time frame. Yeah, and just experiment, right? Because I found that when I looked at like the West Coast Seeds guide, it was actually telling me to plant things in late August, and I've actually started them now maybe towards late July, and I'm finding more successful at getting a full crop because I wasn't getting any peas following that, right? And it was the same for Brussels sprouts, right? I now start my Brussels sprouts in May.
Super early, yeah.
Yeah, super early, because I find this takes, well, and never know what the weather's going to be like, right? So I'd rather start them early and have them mature early.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So, and they're doing great this year.
Love it. Yeah. And then, kind of like, just always having something in the wings that you're able to pop into the garden, depending on how the season's unfolding. If things are bolting fast, they're staying in the garden a little bit longer, perhaps hoped.
But even sketching out your garden, like, I have 6 raised beds, and I'll sketch them out and measure them out, and then I'll look at a seed package to see how long it's going to grow for, what the spacing needs are for it, how big is it going to be, how tall is it going to be, will it shade other plants, right? And sort of where they're going to go in the garden. And I do the same thing for flowers, because there's a lot of flowers as well that are succession planted as well. So, that's a whole...
we might have to do like a full follow-up session on succession planting just for flowers, as I know that's a whole other rabbit hole that we could go down here. I'm going to go ahead and dive into some of the questions here. Shayla, I couldn't agree with you more, calling gardening the great experiment. Absolutely love that. Question from Lisa here. So Kristen, when you harvest the potatoes, how long after the flowers kind of emerge are you harvesting them?
Well, my potatoes are flowering now. So what I will do is I wait for the foliage to turn yellow, and then I will start to feel under the plant to see I don't wait for it to completely die down because it's always nice to have a few of those early potatoes, but I'll usually kind of stick my hand down there beneath the soil and pull out a few early ones and try not to disturb the rest of the plant. I'll just take out a few, like 4 or 5 for dinner, and I'll just grab them from different plants depending on how often, and then I'll just let them continue to grow on. And once the plant sort of completely died back or completely yellow, when the foliage is all gone yellow, then you can dig up your potatoes, and make sure you have some kids to do that for you.
Yeah.
They just don't, they have no idea where the potatoes come from. They really don't. And so when you make a game of it and you pull that plant out or let them to help, they're just like, yeah, it's so much fun to see their faces.
Totally, totally. I will be that little kid at your house pulling out the potato. I like pulling rooted crops. Like I was just filming some of that, the thinning of carrots, and just like getting to like peer beneath the surface, see how they're doing is so fun. I think that's super cool that you will grab and harvest, a couple of those top potatoes, but leave the rest of the plant in there until it's yellowed and completely died off. That's really neat.
Oh, yeah, you got to have some baby potatoes. Where do you think, that's where the farmers get it out here in Ladner. They actually grow theirs in a greenhouse to have baby potatoes.
And so speaking of the greenhouse, there's a question that came through. I can't quite remember who asked it there, but they were just wondering, what do you grow in your greenhouse over the winter? Do you have anything that you have going in there over the course of the winter?
I have not grown a lot of vegetables over the winter in my greenhouse. I will probably do that now. I never had a heater that worked as well as the one I've got now. Okay. So now I can keep it at 10 degrees Celsius in the greenhouse throughout the winter. And so that's a game changer for me in the winter. So that was just new this winter. So I basically use it to bring in a lot of overwinter plants. So I'll bring in even some of your annual grasses. You used to be surprised how many annuals that you can bring in and overwinter in a greenhouse. So why not, right?
Totally.
Plant prices are way up right now. Yeah. So
yeah, totally. That's awesome that you've got a heater in there now as well. And so does that just like kind of kick on automatically once it drops below 10 Celsius and then brings it back above that?
Yes. I got a thermostat. Yeah. Through BC greenhouses, and it's been great. It was, instead of running a tiny little electric heater for so many years and just keeping it above freezing, right? So this year, it'd be nice to be able to grow some salad crops. I mean, I would need lighting though, and I don't have lighting yet, so I would need to put lighting in. And I'm in a residential area, like I don't, you'd have to run it during the day and turn it off at night. So, yeah.
Yeah, all part of it for sure. So question from Barbara here. Kristen, what's a good succession crop to put into the beds where you've taken out the garlic later in July? What would be some of those?
I would suggest putting carrots in. Carrots can go and be planted usually up till July 15th in this area. And you could put in a short, something that a bush bean, perhaps something that's got a short days to harvest, would be a great crop. But beans grow really, really quickly when the soil is warm. So they're perfect for growing. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that I would recommend planting, because you'll get a great harvest from beans too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas carrots can stay in the soil until like winter, right? And be harvested when you want.
Yeah. I love that window of when your garlic comes out to when your garlic goes back in kind of like mid to late October. And just like that 90-day period to pop something in there, whether that's beans, I've done beets in there before. So there's lots that you can be following, following garlic with for that succession crop there.
And I guess there's a lot of other things you could put in if you want to wait until like August, which won't be too far away from our garlic harvest time anyway. So if it starts to cool down, definitely try your salad crops as well.
Totally. And actually kind of tangent on that question, and this is one that I'm really curious about, is do you start or would you start any rooted crops in seed cells, or would you direct sow all those, such as your carrots?
That's funny because that's a really common question. And normally in the past, I would have said no. And then my friend Joe Lampole from if you've watched Growing a Greener World, he starts all his beets and carrots in cells. And he says it's just a myth that you can't do that. But because they're root crop, I think you have to get them at the right size so that they'll transplant properly. Because I think that if they got all cramped up in their seed cells, then that would be like a recipe for a crooked carrot, right?
Yeah.
Putting
Totally. So this is, I don't know definitively just yet because I'm running an experiment on it right now, but I started 2 sets of seeds, one of them in seed cells and one of them direct sown for carrots. And then I transplanted in those carrots after 21 days. So they basically got like a 21-day head start than those that were direct sown into the beds. I've just kind of done like a sneaky harvest or 1 or 2 of them, and they're growing like perfectly straight. But in past seasons, I left them in the seed cell for like 28 to 35 days. And it was at that point that they started to go a little bit wonky. So my hypothesis at the moment is that you can start them in seed cells. But to your point, you got to transplant them at the right point before they get too big to mature.
Yeah, I think if the greens are only an inch high, you're probably safe, right? To transplant them at about that point, right? So yeah, I don't know if I'd wait too much longer.
No, yeah, like I mean, when I transplanted them in after 21 days, and I had them in a 3-inch seed cell, the taproot on the carrots was already all the way down to the bottom and doing like its first little like twirl around. So like taproot, it just like goes straight down to the bottom of the seed cell as quickly as it can there.
Because the roots grow faster than the top half of the plant, right?
Yeah,
Go first.
Yeah, no, totally. Question from Suzanne here. So, Kristen, last year I grew 3 kinds of beets for the first time in my community garden, and the mice or voles came and ate all the beets and carrots. Do you have any ideas about how to go about deterring them?
Oh boy. I shouldn't be saying this, but I think it's like they love anything starchy because we had the same problem at our community garden where the rats went in and ate all the tops off of everybody's potatoes one year and therefore made every potato unusable unless they were planted deep. But I don't know how to keep them away. I guess, sanitation is probably the best thing, especially in a community garden. That we found that the composters, like if people were composting on site, they were bringing household scraps and composting. So that kind of drew them to the area as well. But I don't know. And you can't really, unless you're going to be trapping them or something like that and releasing them somewhere else. Yeah, it's really hard to prevent them.
Is it possible to do like a physical barrier over top? So some kind of like a cage around your goods? That's what I do to keep the birds away from my strawberries.
You could use, like a hardware cloth, like a 1/4-inch hardware cloth. Now the holes have to be really small though, but you could do something like that over top.
What about like chicken wire that is on a wooden frame?
They could still squeeze through that.
Yeah.
I mean, they got through a 1/2-inch hole into my greenhouse one year. Only one.
All you need is though, unfortunately.
Well, and of course it was winter, so there was nothing in there at the time, but so it wasn't a problem, but it scared me.
Yeah,
that's for sure. So it's really hard, right? I must admit that I don't have a lot of rat damage. I back onto a waterway, but I do cover all my overwintering crops are covered with a heavy floaty row fabric in the winter. And you know what I've found? Like we have beaver problems and raccoon problems, but I found that animals in the wild sort of take the path of least resistance. So as soon as we put a fence up, no more raccoons.
Yeah.
They're too lazy to climb the fence, so they'll go to the next yard.
Well, and that's, I mean, it is a really, really good point because it is kind of like just a matter of like, can I make it more difficult to get in here than anywhere else in the neighborhood? And if that's the case, then, pretty quickly they'll move on to that next yard, that next area, which like isn't a bad idea. And just kind of like piece of knowledge to keep in the back of mind.
I mean, we've had cats for years, so having a cat, but that's pretty hard to community garden. But you hope that there's a neighbor's cat around to help you out.
So I got a question from Bonnie here. This is one I'm really interested in. Kristen, can you cheat with space for cucumbers? Can you cheat with space for cucumbers? I currently have 5 cucumber plants in one 5-gallon grow bag, and I'm nervous to transplant them at this point. What are your thoughts there?
5-in-1 grow bag is a lot, right? Unless it depends on the brand. I've got 2 in a container, so similar to a grow bag, but they're a patio snacker, so they only grow 24 inches across. So as opposed, like, would never grow regular. That's probably too many large cucumbers for one grow bag, because what happens is the root systems are all going to be competing with each other for all those nutrients in that bag, right? So I think eventually at some point they might get depleted. So that's the biggest issue I would worry about. It's like I never put 2 tomatoes in a pot either, because if you've ever pulled out a tomato root ball, you know that the roots are like 3 feet long, and even in a raised bed, they have a tremendous root system. So yeah, you don't want that competition.
For sure.
But I would try transplanting at least one to see how that makes out. I mean, I wouldn't do it now during the heat wave, but as soon as it cools down, when you've got a cloudy, overcast day, that's the best time to do it. And just make sure your soil's moistened, and ahead of time, you've got that hole dug already for it. And it might just be fine, right? So I know they don't like to be transplanted. Depends how big the plant is.
Well, and I think that there's ways that you can go about transplanting as well that are like more intrusive and less intrusive. So Bonnie, one thing that you could do there is, rather than like pulling them out of that grow bag, is that like dig the hole, whether that's in a 30 gallon grow bag or in a raised bed or in the ground. And then once you've dug the hole that you're going to be moving them into, cut the grow bag. So cut all the material so that you're not actually disturbing the soil at all, but rather you're just placing it into the new hole. And then, probably with the help of one person, slide the bottom out and then backfill in with the surrounding soil. And now that root system, it's been disturbed kind of as little as possible. So, I'd say that there's kind of multiple ways that you could probably go about playing around with it, including leaving them as is. I think like the biggest thing that's coming to mind for me is just that like this is going to be a beautiful learning. Like they might end up growing well in that 5-gallon grow bag. You might decide to pull one of them out, transplant it, and now you've got that learning for, okay, I can transplant a cucumber out of an environment like this, or maybe it doesn't end up going successfully. These are all the beautiful learnings that you're going to be able to take and apply into subsequent seasons, which is such a fun part of gardening. Okay, question from Silva here. Kristen, will carrot rust fly be gone when planting carrots mid-July?
I've never had a problem with carrot rust flies, so that's real hard for me. I always cover my carrots after planting. I always carry them. I put like a lightweight row cover over top until they're up, and I don't usually have too serious of a problem. And in our community garden, if it's really windy, they won't fly. So I'm not sure. They have several generations. I don't know how many generations they have per year, but I haven't had to deal with it because I've always used a floating row cover on anything that needs beets, Swiss chard for leaf miner. I put it over carrots for rust fly. So far I haven't any problems because I've used the floating row cover to prevent pests, right? And same with all the brassica family. I always cover all those when I grow.
Yeah, totally, to protect them from the cabbage moths. Yeah, it's not one that I can comment on because I haven't experienced it on my carrots. So I'll have to, not be able to add any insight on that one there. Quick question from Sandra here. Kristen, what type of heater is it that you have in your greenhouse there?
Oh, now you're going to ask me to remember the name of it. I remembered it earlier too, right? Oh, I can't remember the name. I know if you go onto the website for BC Greenhouses and look under their heaters. Oh heavens, I can't remember. I should be able to remember, but it's a nice one. It's nice, and it does, like, I've got an 8x20 greenhouse, and so it does about 150 square feet. So, and you can add the thermostat is of course an extra cost, but it's just well worth it. And I don't know if it's cost me anything extra to run, really. No. I can't tell between that and the electric car. I can't tell what's taking more energy, really. I don't think it's the car either.
All I know is either one of them is lower than gas.
Yeah.
Okay, really good question from Ursula here. Kristen, what kind of rejuvenation should we do to the soil when we take out the garlic and put in the carrots in July or salad greens in August? So what do you do with your soil between crops when you're succession planting?
Okay, so I've got all the crop removed, and of course I clean up all the debris because there's always debris after from crops. And I don't always, I take out as many roots as I can if I'm growing carrots because you want that really nice smooth soil. So I always go out and I always get perhaps a couple bags of aged manure from the garden center. I used to be able to buy aged manure from a farmer, but that's no longer viable now. They've moved.
Mm,
And I usually spread that into the soil on the top of the soil. I'm a no-till gardener, so I don't really till it in. And then I might just kind of fork it into the top couple of inches or whatever. And then I'll also add some Gaia organic fertilizer. I usually use their all-purpose, their 444, and mix that into the soil, and then I'm good to go.
yeah,
Just
love.
really, yeah, water the soil well before you plant your seeds or your transplants, right?
Totally. Yeah. Very similar, like for myself on that front. And I think the biggest piece on that front is approaching soil as, something that like you're kind of doing from like a building or maintenance perspective that, when something comes out of the garden, it's been pulling nutrients from the soil, right? It's been kind of, yeah, pulling out of that bank account that the soil is. So we need to make a deposit back into that bank account of the soil in the form of compost, manures, worm castings, the organic fertilizers, etc. So really, really like that. And Ursula, if you kind of take that approach of always making deposits back into the soil, I'd venture to guess that the crops are just going to get better and better each and every season there. All righty. I think we're getting towards the end of the questions here. So folks, if there are any more questions, go ahead and fire those into the chat function here. Bonnie, I'll shoot you an email afterwards on the cucumbers there and spacing, just because I know your specific kind of growing environment, having popped over there once or twice. Okay, question from Patty here. How long do you leave the row cover on your carrots?
For most of the season, or until they're so high that I'm not really going to, until they're almost mature, then I don't usually worry about it. When I start to see them almost ready and they're starting to size up, and then I just take it off, right?
Yeah.
So
Easy peasy.
it's pretty easy, right? With the brassicas, it's a whole different ball game because that cabbage butterfly, she can really destroy a good head of broccoli, right? And there's nothing worse than your kids saying, "Mommy, why are there caterpillars in my dinner?" Right? It happened, when I was a newbie gardener, right?
Oh
Oh
no.
no, I did.
And I can
I
only
didn't have a clue.
imagine that make it a little bit more challenging for the kiddos to be eating from the garden moving forward.
I know they probably will never eat broccoli again, right? And
No.
to top that off, it's the Palma heater that I use in my greenhouse, just so I'm Palma. So
Okay.
PALMA is the type of heater that I'm using in the greenhouse. Quite happy with it.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Yeah, I saw a couple of kind of follow-ups on that front there. Awesome. And yeah, on the row cover front, I love just having row cover on hand. So I've got like a big roll of it that I just picked up from like Lee Valley. And it's just really nice to be able to like throw over top of different things as needed. And kind of just like have as like a little bit of like a utility item in my, little like storage shed of gardening supplies. So yeah, just like a big fan of row covers and having that supply
Yeah.
on hand there.
Great to have in the garden if you have problems with cats coming to use your beds when they're empty in the winter. So if
Mm,
you have, yeah, because I mean, I don't need to fill up all my beds throughout the winter. So anything that's not in use will get a row cover of one of my older row covers will be put over it and hold it down with some bricks or rocks or whatever. And yeah,
yeah,
it keeps all the pests, the critters out, right?
cool. Yeah, I use landscape fabric over the course of the winter. So I just throw that. I put like a whole bunch, like probably like 5 to 6 inches of leaves onto each one of my beds. And I
Yes.
take landscape fabric and I just grab some rocks, put those on the end. That keeps the landscape fabric down. And the landscape fabric, it keeps all of the leaves in place. And they decompose so beautifully over the course of the winter into the early spring.
Leaves are gardener's gold. They really are, along with compost, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like I can't wait to put leaves. I can't wait. It has to be warm for a few days before I'm allowed to mulch yet. So
The things that we scavenge for, I'm definitely known every now and then to be doing a little bit of compost diving and going through the big compost bins at the local community garden, pulling goodies out from there and bringing them back to my house. So it goes. So Sandra just asked, how do you keep it down? The wind blows mine off. Sandra, just to answer that question there, you probably picked it up from what I alluded to, but I put like just big rocks on each of the ends. So I probably like for a 4 foot by 8 foot raised bed, I probably put 6 rocks on. So 2 on each of the ends and then 2 in the middle. And then you should be in a pretty good place there and not have any of them blowing off into the future. But that actually looks like it's the last question there, which lines up with it literally being 8 p.m. on the dot here. So the timing works out perfectly. I think that's everything for this evening here. Kristen, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Jordan. This has been fun. I love to talk gardening. So
Totally. Yeah. It's tons of fun chatting with you. And yeah, we'll have to, as we continue doing these gardening talk shows, have you back on, whether it's in the fall for closing down the garden and getting it all ready for the winter, or even leading into the spring, for next season. You've just got you've got such an immense amount of knowledge, and you do such a great job of explaining things in words and ways that make sense to me, which, I need things fairly simple and fairly kind of like easy to understand. So I just really, really appreciate the way that you communicate all of these pieces on the succession planting kit and other things throughout the garden.
well, thank you.
All righty, folks. So we will go ahead and begin wrapping up here. The one piece that I will just quickly share my screen on is that if anybody is wanting to get their hands on our succession planting kit, then the timing works out really, really well on this, because basically beginning of July, as Kristen kind of alluded to, is a great time to be getting all of those succession crops up and running and growing. So in that succession planting kit, you get your 2 bags of worm casting seedling mix. So if you want to be starting anything in seed cells before, say, the garlic is harvested out, that's what you're going to be utilizing that worm casting seedling mix for. And then the succession planting kit, it also comes with a bag of your pure worm castings, plus a bag of our 284 rooted food for your carrots, your beets, your rooted crops, etc. And so we are, as always, offering free shipping on that, regardless of where each and every one of you are, until the end of the weekend. All that you need to do is head to the link in the description of this video here. That'll take you over to the succession planting kit on our website. There's a video there that explains exactly how to utilize it, and you'll be off to the races. We just got this amazing note the other day here from Brittany. Everyone keeps asking me what kind of magic I have going on in the garden. My worm castings and fertilizer I bought from Mind and Soil is an absolute game changer. My plants are double my family's who also have greenhouses. I'm already eating out of my garden vegetables that I wasn't even able to grow at all last year. So really, really just seeing tons of success with all these different goodies that are in the succession planting kit. With now at this point, it's about 312 5-star reviews on our website. So you get a money back guarantee, you get it shipped to your house for free. We're going to be growing all through the summer and into the fall here. So again, the kind of code for that is Let's Grow 5006. But that will be automatically applied if you just click on the link in the description of this video here. But folks, that is everything for this evening here. Thank you all so much for the amazing questions. Thank you, Kristen, for all the incredible knowledge that you bring to the table here. Can't wait to catch everybody on the next one. And then as always, any questions that you have, just leave those on any of our YouTube videos and you'll get a response from me within 24 hours. That's all for this evening here, folks. Talk to you all soon.